And what is strange is that people with an interest in witchcraft who wind up homeless behind the Army Reserve Center and Coach House Motel seem to be a reoccurring theme. So now let's talk about the next campsite where a couple stayed while they were homeless, and where a book entitled Wicca for Beginners was found along with some clothes, toothbrushes, and some paperwork from the state. So like before, I have to keep the next couple's names confidential. So instead, I'm going to use the names Paul and Michelle. So based on this court document left at this campsite, along with both men's and women's clothes, I guess that both Paul and Michelle were living at this campsite. The document is a review from the 8th Circuit District Court Family Division in Keene, New Hampshire. And it's dated September 4th of 2014. And it is a summary of what has happened since March the 4th of 2014, when DCYF, that stands for the Division of Children, Youth, and Families, got involved in Paul and Michelle's personal life in regards to their then 4-year-old son, Paul Jr. And it started on March the 4th of 2014, when Michelle's father, that I will call Richard, applied for temporary guardianship of his grandson, Paul Jr. So I think that the grandfather was applying for state assistance or was trying to enroll his grandson in the Head Start program, because the document reads, I quote, Paul Jr. attends the Keene Head Start program and does very well in school, end quote. The Head Start program is like nursery school for families that cannot afford to pay for it on their own. And Head Start is right next to the SCS building in Keene. In fact, they're in the same building. So I think that the grandfather was trying to apply for assistance when the state began to ask him where the child's parents are. So the report goes on to state that DCYF, the Division of Children, Youth, and Families, was contacted by the Keene Probate Court after Richard had reported that he had been providing care for his 4-year-old grandson because his daughter was rarely around to care for her son, and he had concerns about her using drugs. And the child's father, Paul Sr., was in prison. So through DCYF intervention, a charity organization known as Easter Seals was empowered by the court to supervise all visits between the little boy and his parents from then on in. So I looked up Easter Seals on the internet and saw on their website that they are a charity organization that provides help for people with disabilities like mental retardation and autism. And nowhere on their website does it suggest that Easter Seals also gets involved with DCYF and supervises visits between children and their parents who have been separated by the courts. Now, nowhere in the report does it state that anyone in this family has a learning disability, mental retardation, or autism. And under the category of Paul Jr., they write Paul is a very intelligent and outgoing 4-year-old boy. Paul Jr. appears to be very advanced developmentally for his age. Paul Jr. is incredibly smart and loves to read. And the report says that Michelle has visits with her son twice a week through Easter Seals. But Michelle does not call the DCYF. So all information on their report was given by service providers. So these unidentified and shadowy service providers who provide all the information on Michelle in this report state that Michelle is using drugs, she is homeless, and she is living in a tent off of Route 101. They state that Michelle tells these service providers that she is struggling with drugs because she is constantly around drugs and is triggered regularly to use. She states that she would like to attend treatment, but they report she is unable to because she has not called DCYF and Child Protective Services to start this referral process. So after reading that, I am left wondering who these service providers are. They could be Easter SEALs, who seem to have no trouble getting in contact with Michelle. In fact, they are there every time she wants to see her son. But I'm guessing that quite possibly the service providers are the SCS network. And if that's the case, why does she need to be referred to the SCS network if she is already in touch with them and they already know all about her, what drugs she is on, and where she is living as a homeless person? So my guess is, as a homeless person, Michelle's first stop would be the SCS office to try to get some welfare, food stamps, apply for one of their programs, something. Maybe a Coach House motel voucher coupon. But by saying that she refuses to call Child Protective Services to be referred to someone who could get her help is a tricky and neat way that the system can write up paperwork that hides the fact that Michelle is not receiving any help from the system that is so involved in her life at this point. They have people present every time she wants to see her child, about twice a week. And some more truth to the matter is exposed under the category of Paul Smith. And it says that Paul, who's the child's father, has also had limited contact with DCYF since the adjudication. They write that Paul did call Child Protective Services one time to set up visits with his son through Easter SEALs. So by writing that, it shows that in order to set up visits through Easter SEALs, like Michelle, you need to call the Child Protective Services at DCYF. So the idea that Michelle is not receiving any help because she is not calling the right department is a bunch of bullshit that sounds good in their little court document that hides the truth to what's really happening through all of this. So at some point, Paul gets out of jail, and the court report says he begins to have visits with his son starting in late July 2014. And they say that he got a job at the Donut Kitchen LLC in Keene, New Hampshire, but has reported to Easter SEALs that he has lost that job. And based on 3 pay stubs found at their campsite, it says that Paul's hire date at the Donut Kitchen was June 13th, 2014, and his latest check was dated August the 8th of 2014. So the document goes on to state that there were some arguments between Paul and Richard. And again, Richard is Michelle's father who is caring for their son. And because they have some disagreements, the court issues an order of protection against Paul and Michelle because both would show up at Richard's house unannounced and want to have visits with their son without Easter SEALs being there to supervise. And this causes arguments. So the orders of protection are filed. And on the court document dated September 4th of 2014, it says Paul's current address and living situation is unknown. However, on his paycheck, Paul's home address is listed as 17 Lamson Street, Keene, New Hampshire, which is the 100 Nights Shelter. So Paul was also released from jail, and instead of going into a halfway house, they released him into the shelter system. And he used the address of the 100 Nights Shelter when he got a job, even though the 100 Nights Shelter closed March 31st and only operated as a soup kitchen and a drop-in center all through the spring, summer, and fall. So again, it is interesting to note on the SCS website, under their Second Chance for Success program. They write that there is a substantial need for housing for inmates released from prison. However, at their sister shelter, the 100 Nights, they have the facilities, yet choose to remain closed for most of the year. And people like Paul and Michelle, and Tanya and Brad, are left in tents behind the Army Reserve Center, reading books on Wicca or witchcraft for beginners that they check out of the Keene Library. Also, there is something else that is strange in this court document, and it says, I quote, Child Protective Services has had numerous concerns regarding Michelle's behaviors while under the influence. Michelle frequently shows up to her father's home asking for money or cigarettes. Michelle attempted to break into her father's safe and has been seen attempting to take things from his home. Richard called the police back in July, and Michelle was in jail for a night because she had paraphernalia on her. So, if the state is concerned about Michelle's drug use and living conditions as she is homeless, why was she arrested and then released the next day? The court could have ordered her to go into a treatment facility to avoid jail time, but instead they arrested her, did not appear to charge her with anything, and let her go the next day without any stipulations that the state or the court would write on their court documents. So it was as if the state preferred her to be homeless behind the Army Reserve Center, addicted to drugs, and not receiving any help for one reason or another. Items also found at their campsite includes a Monadnock Family Services brochure, which says a United Way agency. And United Way is the big sponsor there at SCS. So obviously Michelle and Paul had been to the SCS office. And they also had a Narcotics Anonymous brochure from the Green Mountain Area Narcotics Anonymous group called GMANA. And the website is www.gmana.org. So quite possibly, Michelle and Paul had been attending NA meetings to try to get some help. But Narcotics Anonymous meetings are not enough when you are homeless, living in a tent off the local highway. The last item found among Michelle and Paul's belongings at the campsite was a bookmark for the Kiwanis International Club that meets at 7:30 in the morning at the Pub Restaurant, which is the same restaurant that Tanya had a business card to. The Kiwanis Club looks like something like the Rotary Club. It says Kiwanis International Club of Keene, New Hampshire. Works to improve life for kids and young adults in the Monadnock region. It says they provide leadership clubs at the local high schools and at Keene State College. They provide scholarships, Christmas presents, car seats, and support summer camp for terminally ill children. So again, by looking at all these brochures, it looks like they were being given referrals by someone. But to places like the Kiwanis Club that meets in a bar at 7:30 in the morning and doesn't advertise that they do much for homeless people, the people who should have been providing them help, the SCS and the DCYF agencies, chose to allow these two young kids to remain homeless while writing a report that seems like a great lie and stating that they could not get in touch with Michelle to begin a referral process when they had her in police custody in July of 2014. So maybe like Tanya, Michelle and Paul were being programmed by some group of people, which is why at both campsites were found items that had something to do with witchcraft. And finally, you will read that this group of people at the 8th District Court and DCYF in Keene, New Hampshire, now have legal custody of Paul and Michelle's son. although for the time being he will live with his maternal grandfather